This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on National Rail Plan for Infrastructure Capacity Enhancement. The participants are Shekhar Iyer, political analyst, and Nilab Srivastav, journalist.
Whenever we talk about the subject of Indian Railways, some very well-known facts come to our mind. Now, these facts are that the Indian Railway is one of the largest carriers of passenger and cargo in the country. It also has a very vast and deep network connecting the nook and cranny of the country and also the remote locations. It also the provider of employment opportunities to the maximum number of people. The Indian Railways has recently, as good as yesterday, has issued a draft National Rail Plan, and this is aimed at building its capacity and also the freight carrying capabilities. I think these are the two main pillars on what the draft talks about, Mr. Iyer.
Indeed, Nilabji, because the draft plan, which they intend to finalize it and give it up a shape by next month, that is January of 2021. Because, as you said, Indian Railway are one of the largest networks in the world. And if you just see the number of freight trains, I think it has a very unique record, and it's a legacy of the British Raj, but subsequently more and more railway lines have been added, keeping with the demands of the population. And subsequently we have moved from steam locomotives to diesel, and from diesel now we are always trying to achieve 100% electrification. There is another important side to this is, after India committed to the Paris Climate Conference, we have the objective of reducing carbon emission by the railways to net zero carbon emission by 2030, which means this electrification process has to be done in much more faster way, and we need modern locomotives, we need modern coaches, and also railway lines will have to be more than doubled because some sectors are very busy. But at the same time, the economics of the railways, which is the concern of this railway plan, the rail plan, is to see that the railways, given its vast network and the kind of investment that have already been made and subsequent investments that will be required to keep this system very robust. So this draft plan is focusing ahead. What should be the kind of scenario by 2030? What infrastructure projects will have to be rolled out so that for the next 20 years, that is from 2030 to 2050, that 20 years, what all needs to be done in terms of capacity utilization, capacity upgradation, and also the fact that railways has been competing with the road sector. Today, the share of railways is only 27% despite its network everywhere. So the railways objective is that it must increase the carrying of freight by 45% by 2030. And this is part of the national commitment. If we are able to get more of goods to be transported by railways from the roadways, so in terms of carbon emission will be reduced to a great extent. So therefore, this rail plan has taken into account the two objectives. One is to improve the railway infrastructure by 2030 so that it meets the demands and requirements. That is 10 years from now, just a decade. And also lay the foundation stone for improvement that should serve us for another 20 years, that is up to 2050.
The government statement also talks about the exchequer funding of railways project would not be required now as part of this draft. So, Mr. Iyer, what does this exactly mean?
Instead of Government of India committing its own resource, more and more projects are sought to be undertaken by way of public-private partnership. So we have already seen some proposals, rather pilot level, on pilot scale. Some projects have been mooted so that some passenger trains can be run by private enterprise. In terms of providing additional quality customer service that can be handled by the private companies which can take those coaches on lease and provide good service. That is one. The second thing is essentially to allow the railways to concentrate its resources on the infrastructure side. That is exactly the idea. Because part of the National Rail Plan, they are developing what is called the Vision 2024. Which is, the goal is 2030. By 2024, they are looking at how speedily we can implement some of the critical projects. Critical projects in the sense, as I mentioned earlier, 100% electrification, which is a very important thing. See, more and more lines which are now today run by diesel locomotives, they are to be converted into electricity. Already the major corridors are today electrified, whether it is Delhi, Mumbai or Delhi, Chennai, Delhi, Kolkata or the corridors. But there are other subsidiary lines which are also carrying heavy traffic where the electrification project is underway. And the second thing is, some of the congested routes today have double tracks or even triple tracks. But the idea is there should be multi-tracking. And some of these tracks could be used for upgradation in terms of speed. to 160 kilometers per hour for trains on Delhi-Howrah and Delhi-Mumbai routes. These are trunk routes in the sense Delhi-Howrah and Delhi-Mumbai because they connect the cities of Delhi and Kolkata, Delhi and Mumbai. And similarly, for the other golden quadrilateral, that is Kolkata, Chennai, Mumbai, and then other areas which can be also covered under what is called the golden quadrilateral or the golden diagonal routes. So for this, the speed limit is proposed to be increased up to 130 kmph. Currently, they are able to achieve between 100 and 110 kmph in these areas. Then I think the most important thing, if you want to improve speed, the earlier idea was that from unmanned level crossing, you convert them into manned level crossing. But now they are looking at a scenario where if you are going to run high-speed trains, then there should be actually elimination of all level crossing, which means you will have to build either flyovers or under bridges, which regular road traffic will remain uninterrupted and trains will also move without being any barriers by way of level crossings. These are very basic things that will have to be removed. That is the immediate idea.
Speed along with security is what I think is the cornerstone or the pillar that the draft is talking about, working on. And we also see that the mention of high-speed rail corridor, one which is mentioned is about Delhi and Varanasi, and also in the same breath, the dedicated freight corridors between different sectors. We have been hearing about this for some time, Mr. Iyer. I think this also is being talked about in the draft.
Yes, we spoke about projects that should be completed by 2024. But beyond 2024, the projects that are being thought of is in terms of both track and signaling, which require some clear-cut timelines to be implemented. Already, railways brought in a lot of modern signaling system, communication system to have a error-free, accident-free operations. Now, in this connection, the railways' intention to improve their contribution in freight 27% to 45%, they want to create some dedicated freight corridors. Today, you have very dedicated freight services among the major metropolitan centers and major industrial areas to other areas. Now, what they are proposing is there can be one along the east coast, then one can be crisscrossing east-west, and they are also looking at north-south kind of a dedicated freight corridor. So that is from the production areas or the industrial areas to ports, because the government's objective of improving exports. So it dovetails with the objective of the government, which is to see that as we move towards creating a trillion-dollar economy, we will have to provide all this. And as you mentioned that several high-speed rail corridors have been identified. In some cases, work is going on, like we have already heard about Delhi-Meerut, we have heard about Mysore-Chennai, and there are other corridors of the eastern sector, in the western sector. You mentioned about how Delhi-Varanasi high-speed link is being... See, right now what we are seeing is high-speed trains, name of Vande Bharat, already been reduced, and it is already there is one between Delhi-Varanasi, one between Delhi-Lucknow, and one between Delhi and Vaishnav Devi also. The idea is we have dedicated speed rail corridors where special trains, there is one pilot project which is already going on between Ahmedabad and Mumbai, which is your bullet train project. Even though bullet train project would also require dedicated speed corridors, what we are looking at, because bullet trains are supposed to run beyond 350 kmph, we are looking at something like 200 kmph, where trains can move at 200 to 50 kmph. I think the railways is looking at these projects, how we can improve speed with the existing infrastructure and how to create new infrastructure that will take care of the need for speedy connectivity between major centers. This is a very important part of this plan. And of course, all this will require that you have to assess what is the rolling stock requirement. It would mean new freight cars, new passenger coaches, and also high-powered locomotives. They're already manufacturing more than 12,000 horsepower locomotives, particularly from Bihar, which are these new engines which are being used to haul heavy freight. I think we are going to see that more such investments are going to be made to get modern technology to power our locomotives as well as upgrade some of the locomotives. Some of the very innovative projects of the railways, we have seen that many of the diesel locomotives have been converted into electrical locomotives. That was a pilot project undertaken by the Varanasi-based diesel locomotive works, and they have done some very good job where they have been able to convert some of the old diesel locomotives into electric locomotives.
I have a query with regard to the draft when it speaks about the mapping of various assets and various routes for the railways and enhancement of capacity building. So two queries that come in mind are how is the asset creation and the kind of competition, as you were mentioning, with the roads network that the railways is doing in the post-COVID-19 pandemic era, and would it also result in creation of jobs?
Definitely. What the railways are planning to do, we just discussed where the railways is going to with resources. That is why the draft plan talks of involving the public sector in areas like even operation. That is where I said operation of trains by private companies. And ownership of rolling stock. They are looking at the model which is being followed in Japan and also in some of these advanced countries where the private companies also invest in research and building up of modern locomotives as well as passenger coaches. Or even freight cars. You can have companies which manufacture freight cars, even run freight services on the railway line. And that is why there is a lot of talk of how private sector can be involved in development of terminals, because there is another area which will require capital investment, freight terminals, passenger terminals, and also development of track infrastructure, operation of track infrastructure. This can also be on a private-public partnership. That is why you are seeing that Railways wants to engage the private sector. It is also looking at public sector undertakings, because there are public sector undertakings like Bharat Heavy Earth Movers, BEL, and then state governments. See, some of the state governments are also interested in entering this area of transportation. Some projects are already being discussed with Maharashtra, with Kerala, where the state government desires some railways to be extended to some areas in terms of local perception and the demand and requirement, where the state government can also chip in. And also, the idea is that right now we are importing some of the technology for communications, for signals, or even for rolling stock. But the idea is that we should be able to involve more and more original equipment manufacturing industries, that is OEMI, so that it can be somehow involved. Definitely this National Rail Plan, sees that up to 2030 there will be huge capital investment that will be required, so that you are able to create a capacity which is on the basis of the projected demand, we should take care, say, up to 2050, and so that 45% of the freight can be carried by the Indian Railways. And of course, once this investment is made, up to 2030, after 2030, as the rail plan says, there will be surplus revenue generated.
Right.
And that generated revenue will be helpful in financing future capital investment. Because what the government is looking at, railways is a thing that will constantly require investment, both for maintenance, for upgradation, and for improving the quality of service. So that is possible only with sufficient revenue. Sufficient revenue can come only if in advance you have already put in place a world-class infrastructure.
The Railways draft also talks about the enhancing of the manufacturing and looking at various infrastructure projects that can enhance its capabilities to carry more load or freight, as it is called. And when we talk about the government schemes of self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, or the kind of enhancing the manufacturing, we understand that new hubs for manufacturing could be created, like for automobile industry or for defense manufacturing. So will railways be very instrumental in connecting these platforms to get a connectivity for to and fro movement of goods?
Absolutely, because railways is one area it is also the huge service industry, and it is also a huge engineering industry, and it is also an infrastructure industry, and also it is an industry which requires big capital. It's also part of a huge financing system. So in an area where you are seeing all the three in operation, huge financial capital, huge infrastructure and engineering capabilities, and third is huge service sector. And that service sector today, railways wants to expand beyond just catering. See, we saw how railways gradually allowed the catering to be shared with the private parties. And we have seen how company like IRCTC has done very well, which is taking care of reservation as well as catering and other support services. So service sector itself has a scope providing a lot of employment. Now, if you look at engineering side or if you look at the track maintenance, track upgradation, signaling, these are areas which require new technology and upgradation of technology, and in turn they will require capital investment as well as a huge qualified skilled personnel to manage these operations.
Thank you for the conversation, Mr. Iyer.
Thank you, Neelabji.
You were listening to a discussion on National Rail Plan for Infrastructure Capacity Enhancement. The participants were Shekhar Iyer, political analyst, and Neelab Srivastav, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Service Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.